Christmas Eve can be a really strenuous night. And this past Christmas Eve, I thought might kill me. And in part it was, I had charge of two things for the early Christmas Eve service. One was the hat of being the director of the Christmas pageant.
Oh.
One was the hat of being the presider for the Eucharist. Now, as you might know, sometimes we have different hats that demand different things of us, and we have within ourselves, perhaps, competing values. So, my value as director of the Christmas pageant, sort of my artistic value, is that this should all unfold seamlessly and beautifully, and everyone from the little lamb to Mary to the angel Gabriel should be at the height of artistic perfection, and at the very least follow directions. Meanwhile, my priest hat says I should exude extraordinary generosity. From every cell of my being, the peace that the Prince of Peace brings should be oozing out of me over the community. I had a really hard time figuring out how to bring those two things together. Okay, so this is not the first time that I've directed a Christmas pageant. So every year I notice something and I learn something about how to make things all go more smoothly the next time around. So I think to myself, what do I want Christmas Eve? I want us to be calm. All of those hyped up on sugar sheep, I want us to be calm and centered as we move into the liturgy to proclaim the word. So I think a month in advance, I think through what is the line we need to be in to go into the liturgy so everyone can take their correct place. So from the very first rehearsal, I make us sit in that lineup. And every time we come back, we sit in that lineup so everyone knows their place. So Christmas Eve will come and it will all be so smooth. So, hour before the pageant, it's all going well. 10 minutes before the pageant, we are in our circle. Everyone is in their costume. We have warmed up our voices. We have said a prayer. I say now we are going to go around the church and enter the church and the service will begin. So I entire circle, we start filing out and I file around the church to the door we're entering in. And I get there and I turn around and I have one angel and a deacon with me.
Where are the deacons?
Where is the rest of our pageant cast? And then I look through the door, which is glass, and see that they are all just wandering around the church. They're just all wandering around. And my perfectly laid plans have gone awry. And my calm, beautiful priestly composure has gone out the window, and I am already seething with anger and fury, and then angry at myself that I can't pull it together, and Christmas has begun.
Wow.
The Word became flesh and lived among us. So, after the service ended and I had a good cry, the Word became flesh and lived among us. It occurred to me that if God was in favor of perfection, Christmas would never have happened. If God was in favor of perfection, God would not have chosen human form to reveal God's self to us. The Word became flesh and lived among us. The Word comes to us lots of ways, through beautiful poetry and through almost flawless performance performances and complexity and grandeur, but first and foremost, the words comes to us in the flesh, in a form that is embodied, in a form that is personal, in a form that is human. The Word became flesh and lived among us. Like those sheep, lost sheep and angels and Mary wandering around in the church, that word doesn't always follow the preacher. That word sometimes, always actually, precedes the preacher. The Word is among us. In the lost sheep and the lost angels and Mary and Joseph, among us in our circles of song, and sometimes, the practice of sometimes, being able to lift up our eyes from the Word that is here enables us to see the Word that is among us. Enables us to look up while we're singing in our small group, guide my feet while I run this race, and see Ta'al grinning and bouncing, warming up his feet for the day he figures out how to walk and run that race. And if we had been in a book at that moment, attached to this word, we would have missed that word. The word is everywhere. It is here. But it is also here. The Word became flesh and lived among us, full of grace. One of our angels in the Christmas pageant was dubbed the Angel Crucifer. Her job was to carry our fairly heavy cross through the whole pageant, sort of preceding the angel Gabriel. This angel happened to be an 8-year-old who also happens to be my daughter. And it's time to go up to the table for Eucharist, and I see her, but I don't see the cross. Alexandra, I say, where is the cross? Oh, it's over there, she says. She said it, at which point the giant cross falls over a baby's car seat. Alexandra! I said, you almost killed a baby! You almost killed the baby Jesus on Christmas!
That's what they
The Word became flesh and lived among us, full of grace. You know, grace wouldn't be necessary if we were perfect. Grace is not a very weighty thing for a perfect person. However, grace for the 8-year-old angel whose arm was really tired from having carried the heavy cross through the whole pageant. Alexandra needed grace. Grace for the mama/priest who needs to pull it together, or take a deep breath, or something. Grace. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace. The grace that is in fact made manifest and made perfect and made complete in our weakness. We take risks, we make mistakes, we offer up our weakness, because that is the space into which God pours God's grace. The Word became flesh and lived among us, full of grace and truth. And that, I think, is the hardest and most painful and most life-giving lesson of all, is that what the Word reveals to us and calls calls us to is not flawlessness, it's honesty. We're called and invited, beckoned, empowered to be real with one another and with ourselves and with God. The Word became flesh and lived among us, full of grace and truth. Remember this morning as you stand up to help us worship. Remember in the days ahead as you return to your church and your families and your schools to help lead and participate in the making of music, that it is through you, through your improvisations and your compositions, through your invitations and your leadership, through your song, that the Word is becoming flesh and living among